This handshake was the hope of peace between Palestine and Israel. And this is what the map was supposed to look like. But this is the reality. The Oslo Accords that defined the end of the occupation in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank were signed in 1993. It was the moment that the Palestinian Liberation Organization recognized the State of Israel, and Israel recognized the PLO. The Accords aimed to set up the Palestinian Authority as an interim government. That interim government was supposed to transform into a permanent one after the Palestinian Independent State was established in Gaza in the West Bank by 1999. The two sides were given 5 years to come up with a final agreement that would lead to a two-state solution. But now, years after the due date, Palestinians still don't have a state. To understand why, we first need to dig deeper into the agreement, then understand what has happened since on both sides. The Oslo Accords were signed after several secret meetings were mediated by Norway for over a year. Popularly called Oslo I, they established the Palestinian Legislative Council, which would be democratically elected and meant self-governance for Palestine. They also set parameters for the gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from parts of Gaza and the West Bank, which has been under illegal occupation since 1967. Before the entire West Bank was scheduled to go under Palestinian control, the region was divided into these three areas: A, B, and C. Area A, according to the agreement, was meant to be under full Palestinian control. It initially comprised 3% of the region and grew to 18% by 1999. Area B is where Palestine would have civil control and Israel and Palestine would have joint security control. It consisted of around 25% of the region. In 2011, it went down to 21%. Area C would be under full Israeli control except for its Palestinian civilians and form up to 74% of the territory. But this was never implemented. Israel did withdraw from a tiny part of the area but occupied the West Bank after Operation Defensive Shield in 2002. It still continues to build illegal settlements that are against the Geneva Convention while destroying Palestinian villages. The effort put into the Oslo Accords was recognized by the international community. In 1994, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, Israeli Foreign Prime Minister Shimon Peres, and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In May 1994, the first phase of the Oslo Accords was implemented. Israel and the PA signed the Cairo Agreement, giving Palestinians control over parts of Gaza and Jericho. Then in 1995, a second agreement was finalized in the city of Taba, Egypt. That would give the PA additional territories in the densely populated West Bank. But the Oslo Accords have not even come close to being realized in any meaningful way. First, they were opposed by many Palestinians and Israelis. An ultranationalist Israeli who allegedly opposed the Accords assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. Palestinians criticized the PLO for agreeing to give Israel access to over 71% of the aquifer's water in the West Bank, while Palestinians were granted only 17%. Some also claimed that the agreement curtailed Palestinian economic capacity because it kept Israel in control of the land, water, and borders. Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party won the election in 1996, but from the very beginning, they had been bitterly opposed to the deal with the PLO. Netanyahu has repeatedly denounced the accord as a violation of the historic right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, and as a mortal danger to their security. In 2000, Israel and the PA tried to negotiate a permanent agreement at Camp David in the US. The attempt essentially failed. And in the same year, the Palestinian uprising against Israel, known as the Second Intifada, began after Ariel Sharon, along with about 1,000 Israeli forces, entered Al-Aqsa compound, a sacred site to Muslims in Jerusalem's Old City. After everything that happened in the region, in 2015, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas accused Israel of not committing to the Oslo Accords and declared that Palestinians, quote, cannot continue to be bound by these agreements. And still today, a deal which would end the conflict and fulfill what the two sides committed to in the Oslo Accords, a two-state solution and a lasting peace, is still elusive.